Well, now finally, the reason you're really here is our guest speaker. Uh, our guest speaker tonight is Kersti Muul. She is a wildlife field biologist, an urban conservation specialist, and science educator whose work focuses on the intersection of wildlife and urban environments. She is a frequent contributor to local and national media, and her efforts center on the impacts of human activity on natural spaces and biodiversity. Her research explores how avian species have been affected by the climate events around us, urban heat islands, tree canopy loss, noise, entanglement, rodenticides, electrocution, and urban development. Kersti works to empower and educate the community through outreach, monitoring, photography, and community science projects. Kersti is the founder of Salish Wildlife Watch and dedicated to promoting responsible recreation, diversity, and free access to the awe that we find in the outdoors. So with that, when science meets serendipity, I'm looking very much forward to your presentation, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am really excited to be here. I'm really honored to be amongst fellow bird enthusiasts and my friends and people that I don't know yet. And I'm excited to tell this story. So when science meets serendipity. Okay. Sorry, I thought I was having a problem with my slides. So this is one of my favorite little poems. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. So this sums me up and my talk really well, because this is exactly what I did here. I paid attention to something, I was astonished, and now I'm going to tell you about it. And I would like to dedicate this presentation to my dad, who instilled my environmental ethic in me from a very young age and taught me so much about the natural world. You know, he taught me to look closely. A little bit about myself. I'm fascinated with individuation, and I spend a lot of time researching individuals and their lineages. So here's just an example of the amount of years that I've been looking at either one particular bird or their lineage. And what I've learned is just completely fascinating and invaluable and pretty humbling. And oftentimes I get unprecedented data from them. So this is a feel-good story, I think, in a time where we really need it. Yeah, this was also during COVID, so another time where we needed, happy stories, and people were staying home and getting outdoors more. And I was laid off. A lot of people were laid off. It seemed like they were discovering birds. Birding became very popular during COVID. So this is an animal, a bird, a bald eagle named Bay. I don't particularly care to name wildlife, but in this case, it had extremely positive outcomes, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. So I'm open for this to be interactive. I'm used to presenting to audience in person and having it be interactive. So if you have, don't feel like you can't raise your hand or interrupt me. I'm happy to chat about something if you have a burning question or just something that you want to share that's relevant to this. Okay, so, and I, in that vein, I do call her Bay now, just because it's stuck and everybody knows her by that name. So this was the first, well, I thought this was the first time that I met Bay. There was an eagle at Don Armini boat launch along Alki Avenue, and she had been sitting in the grass for a long time. She took some low flights, and to me, she had somewhat of a depressed mentation. And so a woman named Barb Vatican called Dave Hutchinson with Steel Sitters. Dave called me, I called pause, and there were obviously a lot of other people involved, but I was right there kind of on the front lines looking at her and trying to figure out what was going on. And Brittany Philbin, who is here in this talk in the audience, she is my admin on my Salish Wildlife Watch app. She's my sightings coordinator. She's amazing. She knows every whale by name and their number. So we were looking at our pictures. So the picture on the right there, we noticed that she had, some pink in her fecal matter, so a pink slice. So that's not great. And I'm not going to get into it, but there was a period of time here where she was not going to be captured. And so my partner and I were on the phone with PAWS, telling them why she should be. Because eagles, as you know, can be on the ground, they can be digesting food, they can be flightless for periods of time, but it was quite obvious that that was not the case here. So we were trying to make a case for her capture. And that did ultimately happen, and she did go to PAWS. So when I went home, I went through my pictures of her, and I immediately noticed her left iris had some sort of anomaly to it, kind of like some sun rays coming out from the pupil. So that immediately individuated her for me. And so I set out on a quest to figure out who she was. So after she rehabbed, if she was rehabbed successfully and was released, we could make sure that she came back home if she was from there. So that is the beginning of the mission that I went on because of what I saw in her eye. And so the West Seattle blog was really essential in all of her story from the beginning of, when Tracy published the original story of her capture, and then she continued to post updates. And at some point, she published my call out to the community for sourcing pictures of this eagle based on her eye. So I wanted to know if anyone else had seen this eagle and not noticed her eye, and just go through the pictures, because I was trying to establish a timeline and a territory for her to see if she was present in West Seattle during certain months of the year, how long she was here, was she partnered, did she belong to any of the 4 nests that we have in West Seattle or one of the 5 pairs. So the West Seattle blog was extremely helpful with that. And sure enough, I got my first hit right away. A woman named Sharon Wada sent this picture to me. And so there is her photo on the right, mine on the left. You can see that iris. So I was really excited. And a little bit about Sharon. She lived along Alki, and during COVID, I think she was working from home. So she spent a lot of time on the beach, and really got to know these eagles as individuals and had a lot of pictures of them. And so Sharon is the one who named Bay. And then because of Sharon, I learned that Bay had a partner who she had named Jay. So named after Beyonce and Jay-Z is what their story is. So now I knew not only was she around a lot, I figured out kind of what her territory is. I saw that she was part of a mated pair. So at this point, I'm collaborating with PAWS, letting them know everything that I was figuring out. And so this increased the importance of her coming back home if she had a successful rehab. So I did some more digging. I went through my COVID photographs and just all my Alki pictures. And it turns out that I had already met Bay. She's kind of a city girl. She has a interesting diet selections. And here she is with some various seal pups. This one on the top right is a little bit graphic, but she is eating the pup's eyeballs. So seal pup eyeballs are full of electrolytes and they're really nutritious. So Bay is smart and has a varied diet. So I got even more excited and more invested in her now that I know, like, hey, I've actually seen this eagle. I've spent time with her. I know where she hangs out. Okay, so I started receiving dozens of emails, a lot of inquiry emails and texts from the community. A lot of people knew the mission that I was on, and they were also people who lived near a nest. So there's 4 nests in West Seattle. There's Kellogg Island, there's Lincoln Park, the Saltese Nest, which is along Alki Avenue, and then the Schmitz Park Nest on 56th Avenue. And everybody was messaging me wanting to know if it was quote unquote their eagle. Um, so there was the community just really started getting involved. And, I got an overwhelming amount of pictures and sightings, and all of it extremely helpful. So James Tilley, Karen Hendrickson, and eventually Kathy Lower. James Tilley was essential in helping me establish a late presence of Bay. He had pictures of her well into October in his previous encounters. Karen lived near the Schmitz Park nest, and so I spent a lot of time with her. And early in the morning, when an eagle would show up to that nest, I would run down there and see if the pair, if it was a pair, if it was a single eagle, what was going on. Ultimately, the Schmitz nest did have 2 eagles in it, and it was too soon for any eagle to be recruiting a new mate. So that nest was automatically ruled out. Kathy provided intel on a vocalizing eagle near her house. He was there a lot during the time that Bay was in rehab, and I did end up identifying him as Jay. So Jay, her partner, from the pictures that Sharon sent to me from them on the beach at Alki. I'm really starting to narrow it down with the help of the community. I started writing about it, doing some installments through Westside Seattle Robinson newspapers, just kind of increasing my reach to the community and letting them know how it was going and what I was up to, and that I was investigating all of these nests and the Miquamux pair who were not nesting at the time, but definitely a pair. So I needed to figure out if she belonged to one of these nests. And, this was late February, so it was right at the time, where they would start nesting. And so it was kind of not an easy job, but it made it easier that these eagles were present in their nests, and I could see them all as pairs. And I could rule out that Bay was not one of a mated pair from any nest. So she was a mated pair, but they did not have a nest. So I figured they were maybe a newer pair to each other and just hadn't established any kind of nesting situation yet. So in the meantime, Bay was at pause. Her not so scientific diagnosis that I'll give you was that she ate something nasty. So something from the environment that she got into that just didn't do well in her GI system, and she was severely anemic. She did have that hemorrhagic diarrhea that I did notice. I was a little concerned that it could be rodenticide, but hemorrhagic diarrhea is not a symptom of rodenticide per se. So, but she was given vitamin K therapy just in case. So most raptors that go into rehab that have symptoms of rodenticide poisoning would go through vitamin K therapy. It's a long therapy, and it depends on at what stage you get it, and that will determine if it's successful or not. Most often it's not, and it's a really long rehab. So was really thrilled to find out that it wasn't that. So rodenticide, what I mean is rat poison. A particular kind is an anticoagulant. So it's a second and third generation anticoagulant. And each generation gets stronger and stronger. And it builds up in the liver of rodents. And then the animals that prey upon it, it builds up in their systems as well. And then they hemorrhage and die from it as well. So being that Bay was so anemic, there just happened to be a golden eagle at pause, and she got a blood transfusion from that golden eagle. And I, to this day, think that it gave her superpowers. And so Jay, throughout all this time that Bay was gone, Bay was in rehab for a month, which is a pretty long time. And so I couldn't find any data on how long a mated pair or a partner would wait. So eagles mate for life. They can move on quickly when the other one dies, especially if they see it die or they get that closure. They can move on quickly and recruit a new mate. But Jay did not see her perish. She just kind of disappeared. And so I was really curious about that data set that doesn't really exist about how long a partner would wait. So while she was in rehab, it was 30 days. So collaborating with Pause, and with this slide, this is kind of just a silly little map I made to represent the map I made for Jeff Brown, who was the naturalist of Pause at the time. And so rehabbers really rely on biologists and naturalists and community scientists in the community that have really good historical knowledge of wildlife and where they nest, because it really helps them figure out where the animal can be released. And so I helped them with that. I just had some of the other nests on the map. I had Bay's territory, where her partner was calling for her, that sort of thing. So I got a text telling me that Bay was doing really well. She had been in her flight enclosure and was passing all of her tests. And in the morning, if she passed her blood work, that she was going to be released. And the release site was going to be Hamilton Overlook Park. So that sits up above Alki. And it was out of the territory of the Salty's nest and pretty far from the Kellogg Island nest. And it was in her territory that I had established from all the photographs that were sent to me and my own researching. So at this point, I was 100% confident that she was not a nester from any of those pairs, because all of those eagles were present and counted for at their nests or in their territory. And so Jeff shows up with her, and I hadn't seen her since, well, Paul sent me the picture of her in her flight enclosure, but I hadn't seen her since that day that she was captured. And, there was a lot of emotions for me, and I didn't really know how I was going to feel, but I was pretty attached to her and her story and the fact that she overcame her sickness, um, and she was light. I had never held an eagle up until this point, and as we carried her across the field, I was shocked at how light she was. Subsequently, I have held several eagles, and to me, the females anyway, they feel like about a sack of potatoes, 10-pound bag of potatoes. They're really not that heavy, and in hand, they're not as big as you think they are, and I find that to be the case with any bird. Up close, a bird is either a lot smaller or a lot bigger than you think it is. And that's definitely the case with eagles. So here, this is a Hamilton Overlook. And because of the work that I did, figuring out who she was and working with the community, I also raised $5,000 for her. So I had a donor that matched what I raised. So a significant amount of money was raised because of her individuation. So that's part of the positive part of naming her, is everybody got really involved in this. And this is a video.
Gonna be kind of at an angle like this.
You have to be quick and you have to lift the opening up straight and don't let them see you. So I was a little awkward that time. Hear slow sounds.
No.
Be kind of at an
So as you can see, she was spring loaded in that crate. She really wanted out. She jumped out. She looked around. She had her Pantene moment. She shook it off. But then she sat there for a long time. And I think it was about 20 minutes. I don't quite remember. But it was a long time. And when she took off, obviously the crows showed up immediately to give her a hard time. But she went, straight towards her territory. So this photo is from Sharon Wada again. This is a beautiful photo. It shows her lifting off, her very first flight in the wild, after being in a pen for a month and going through, invasive medical treatments and whatever else, happens to a wild animal when they are in rehab. I know that it changes them somehow, but she's still looking fierce here. She's got her new bracelets on. She's banded. There's my little head. So I really appreciate this picture. So it's just a totally different perspective than what I had from being behind her. I had to stay behind the crate and not disturb her. So again, just, members of the community providing their own perspective and their own beautiful photography. And there's me hiding from her. And this is what I saw from my end. I got to see her back end. Saw her Pantene moment there, and she's shaking it off, and just the classic fierce eagle look. I really liked how her talons were all balled up when she took off, and I knew, since she was banded, that it changed the game for everyone. So as a biologist and someone that knows birds and bird behavior, and I can individuate birds a lot of the times, with plumage anomalies or things like her eye, banding her gave the community an opportunity to experience that individuation with her. Because now they could follow her, and when they see her, they learned how to file banding reports, and there's just a whole other layer of education about wildlife that it's really exciting for me. So at this time, my partner, Jeff Hogan, and Brittany, and I followed her after her release, and because I was really determined to see where she was going to go. And then I discovered again that I had already spent a lot of time with her. So this tree is in the yard of my favorite house in West Seattle. It sits up above Alki. It has a huge lawn, and so at this point, I forgot to mention that Jay had disappeared. So he spent most of the time that Bay was in rehab vocalizing for her near Kathy's house. And that was near West Seattle High School, kind of in that area up in Admiral. And he disappeared. So I thought maybe he gave up on her. So she gets out of rehab. She goes to her territory. She goes to one of her favorite trees. She calls for him just incessantly. It was heartbreaking to watch and to listen to, because again, there's just no information about how long a partner would wait. So this went on for several days. And then in the meantime, Bay goes back to her interesting diet choices. The Seattle blog sent me a picture of her in the road eating something very, very rotten. My partner and I went down there and took it out of the road because we didn't want her to get hit by a car and we did not want her to get sick again. So normally not trying to interfere with what they're eating or doing, but in this case, for her own safety, because it's a road that's dark, it has a lot of blind curbs on it. And that, it looks like a cat, but it wasn't. It was a raccoon and it was beyond rotten. And then another person who was really helpful, Jason Lee Bell, he found her eating rats on Alki, and I was really concerned again about the rodenticide issue that she may encounter, because there is a lot of rat poison along the business district of anywhere really, but especially Alki, a lot of rats. So if you're queasy, maybe take a moment here, but here she is. So after looking at the video, I examined it closely and I kind of determined that I did not see the color of the rat poison that I would be suspecting here. So I felt okay with her diet choice here. And I feel like Bay is she's a cheap date. She'll eat anything. She'll go anywhere. So this was really interesting, and we're going to come back to this later. So Jerry Simmons, another West Seattle community person, he sent me this photo of Bay with an unidentified male. So at this point, I have no idea who this male is. She was playing around with him, and she was pretty far out of her territory. She was almost up near our house, which I'd never seen her up that far before. And so this male, he's an adult, but he's got the bottom of his tail feathers were brown. So we started calling him dirty tail feathers. At that point, I never figured out who he was or what she was up to. And Jay was still gone. So maybe this guy was like, hey, she's a cheap date. She's single. Maybe I'll try my luck. But then she disappeared for 10 days. And I have no idea where she went. I was hoping somebody would spot her bands wherever she went and report them. At that time, it didn't happen. I don't know actually how inspired people are to report bans, but I kind of used Bay's situation to really encourage people to report them if they see them, because finding out where animals are going in a story like this it can be crucial and interesting. And then one day, so it was probably day 11 after she had disappeared, I went to PCC, which is where in that neighborhood where Jay had been hanging out, calling for her. And I get migraines. I had a migraine. I got lost in my own neighborhood, which happens when you have a headache sometimes. And I heard some eagles vocalizing. And so I pulled over. I looked out my sunroof and I saw 2 eagles. I happened to have my camera with me, like a good photographer. I looked closely and it was Bay. And then I looked more closely and it was Jay. And so in that moment, they seemed like they had found each other. And I just started sobbing in my car. I took pictures as I could, and they were pair bonding, touching wings, and doing these elaborate sky dances. And it was unbelievable. And so, the serendipity title, so the serendipity of me getting lost in my own neighborhood and just happening upon them finding each other like this. I can't I can't put words to it. So at this point, I published my third installment of her story, and Westside Seattle published it, and it was all over the newsstands in West Seattle. The title that Patrick picked was awesome. It got a lot of attention. The photograph was just perfect. You know, you don't need to know what the story is about to pick it up. It's just really eye-catching. And then when you read it, it's people tell me it's like a Disney story. And I really tried not to go the route of the dodo and, you know, do all that and anthropomorphize it too much. But it's a really, really, it is a Disney story, and it will make you cry. So his readership went up 300% just from this one article. All of the papers they disappeared from all the newsstands all over West Seattle. I grabbed a stack for myself. And this, unfortunately, was the last print edition of Westside Seattle ever. Also a bit of serendipity there. So I followed them around, and they were being a couple, and they seemed happy to be back together. A lot of vocalizing. And I followed them for months after that, knowing that they did not have a nest. So that was my other fears before I realized that she wasn't a nester at this time, is, you know, they were going to miss that window because she didn't come back until, you know, March, and it would have been too late. So they're not a nest. They don't have a nest yet, but they are happy to see each other. They are doing a lot of pair bonding, including a lot of copulation, which is a part of pair bonding. It's not necessarily, you know, for reproduction. Eagles do copulate outside of nesting season. They're one of a few animals that do. You can see Jay here. He also had an interesting eye. He had extremely pale eyes, and he was also very easy to identify. And I have continued to monitor Bay over the years. This picture of me and her, this was in 2022. It looks like she's far away from me, but she's not. She's extremely close. And I noticed that she had changed since she was in rehab. And I know rehabbers go out of their way and not to get them to, you know, acclimate to humans whatsoever, but she was different. She was closer. At one point, she was on the dock at Don Armini, where the water taxi is, where the people fish there. She was sitting on the dock, kind of like you'd see an eagle in Alaska, just waiting for scraps, which was definitely a new behavior for her. I didn't like seeing it, and she has since then stopped doing that. But for a while, she was coming very close to people. So just to give a shout out to banding again, you know, banding is under attack and it's super important. I had to get my obligatory certificate. And this also shows that she's around, you know, in the late fall. This was October 27th, 2021. So she was definitely around most of the year in West Seattle. And that discovery, you know, over those months and hearing from people in the community and getting the pictures, that is what got her back home into her territory, is proving that she was around all the time. So I am still going to keep this a happy talk, but just to briefly mention, so HPAI hit West Seattle really hard, particularly for the raptors. We lost our peregrine falcons that historically nested under the West Seattle Bridge. The male died first, and then the female after that. Several eagles. We had birds kind of dropping out of migration. We had a snow goose in West Seattle, and I found it on the beach in West Seattle. He had a twisted neck. Yeah, and then there was a trumpeter swan at Alki. So I kind of took care of those birds that had died, as I was so invested in Bay that, I did not want her to, after all of this that she went through and all her success, to eat something infected with bird flu and then have that be her end. And so I ran around like crazy disposing of birds that had bird flu. So on that note, Jay disappeared. And my hypothesis is that he succumbed to bird flu. And so now I'm going to direct your memory to the slide of Bay with the dirty tail feathers guy. She is now. So in 2023, she took over the Salties nest, which was a bold move because that was an occupied nest. It was a very successful nest. I don't know if perhaps the female from that nest also got bird flu, but she must have disappeared. And maybe Dirty Tail Feathers, Jeff likes to call him Dirty Harry, maybe he was the male of the Salties nest and he recruited Bay to that nest, but she did take that nest over in 2023. And they did try to nest. She was incubating, and the nest ultimately failed that year in 2023. In 2024, she was in that nest again and fully incubating. And it seemed like it was going to be successful because it was going on, well into the spring. So I wanted to know what was on the menu with her these days and what she was feeding the kids. So I went and did some investigating. Also at this period of time, do some, field work, investigating all the eagle nests in West Seattle to see, how successful they're going to be and what's going to happen, how many new eagles we're going to have in West Seattle. So I found that she was eating cormorants and gulls and rabbits. I mean, I already know she eats a lot of fish. I see her coming and going to the nest with all kinds of fish. I see her on the beach eating fish. We know that she loves seal pups. So these gull wings, they were all over the place. They were lodged kind of in the crotches of all the big leaf maples, and there was rabbits everywhere, and so pretty varied diet, pretty normal. And then in 2024, she fledged to, if you can't, there's an arrow to help you see the second fledgling. She successfully fledged her very first eaglets in 2024. So sick on the beach, 2021, captured, went through rehab, reunited with her mate, lost her mate, hooked up with another guy and took over a nest. And here she is, proud mom with her two kids. And both of them fledged successfully. I was working at the Coleman Dock in late August, and I was leaving for Utah after that job, and I saw them disperse. I saw them the very last time they flew through West Seattle, and that was just another wow moment for me. So all of West Seattle, all of the people that were involved in this, you helped her get here. And I love this story, how every person that helped, like it, no matter how small or how big it was, it got her to this point. She obviously got herself to this point too, but she would have died if she hadn't gone to rehab. She was very, very sick. So here she is, 2024. Thank you, James Tilley, for his beautiful photography. 2025, same thing. She's incubating. We're getting excited. James, with his massive lens, spots not one, but two again. Well, the arrows can help you see their little beaks. And these guys seem to be ahead of schedule. It kind of surprised me because I had all the females in all the nests in West Seattle they were all in incubation posture. And Bay must have started incubating a couple of weeks sooner than everyone else. Maybe that's her secret. This is a video sent by James Tilley. It's adorable. So you're going to see a hummingbird come in and one of the eaglets there in the nest on the bottom right. He's going to be real curious about it. I really wonder what a hummingbird looks like to an eagle at that range, at any range really, but it's just a really precious video. That reminds me, I did a talk for the Laconar Bird Festival in the wintertime, and there were supposedly orcas in Elliott Bay, and so I ran down to Jack Block Park, and while I was down there, Bay showed up with her partner, and they were doing some pair bonding and being really loud, and there were people there, and they were talking about Bay, and they were using her name, and I couldn't believe she showed up right before my presentation, and all these people knew who she was, and I didn't know these people, and they weren't people that I had interacted with, or because this was in 4 years ago now, so that was really cool. So late last year, there's a woman, Lori Cotey, she's one of my heroes. She is a genius. She has invented this thing called poo gooder. So I have a real problem with dog poop that doesn't get cleaned up. And dog poop is really bad for the environment. It's really bad for the water. So she has these buckets in neighborhoods of high poop traffic where you can dispose of your dog's poop, because a lot of people just leave it and you step in it, or it's just sitting there in a bag. So she takes care of that. She collects the poop. But she was actually one of my heroes, and I always wanted to talk to her about that. So I was curious, where do you take it? Are the bags compostable, and what happens to it? So the fact that she was reaching out to me was pretty humbling. And she told me she was working on this book, Birds Near My Home. So the inspiration for her is the birds that live around her. And she had dedicated the book to me and Bay. Again, had a few tears. It's Bay, it's 2024. She's still having an impact on people. And Lori drew all of these beautiful pictures in this book. And this picture of Bay that she drew is absolutely perfect. Her eye is perfect. And then she had me do some fact checking about her facts about each bird. The book is really cool because for each bird featured, it has a little insight about what you can do to help that particular species. So with the owls, she talks about rodenticide, and then there's these really hilarious poems, and then the sounds that they make. And so Bay is kind of going on the road now. Her and I this spring went to Paper Boat Booksellers and we did a little talk for the kids. And this book is really applicable for any age group. And now Lori is doing a bird book nature walk where she has these installments along the trail. And there's Bay there in the woods along a trail, and she takes you for a walk and talks about the birds in her book and the birds that you'll see on the walk. So Bay is continuing to have an impact. I mean, obviously the book is about other birds too, but Bay is the star, in my opinion. This was a really interesting moment for me. In February, I was at a conference and I had the luck of listening to a short lecture from Christian Hagen of Oregon State University. And he was giving a fascinating talk on dead birds flying. Can rehabilitated raptors mitigate human-caused mortality? And I think Elaine is going to put links to this paper and also an easier reading version of it in the chat. So he was looking at rehabilitated raptors, and his hypothesis, I think, was that they didn't contribute to the overall population as well as wild birds. But he was wrong. So I had a long talk with him after his talk, and I talked to him about Bay and how successful she is as a rehabbed raptor. And, that West Seattle produced, 4 more eagles just from her. And so we had a long talk about that. And I do need to get back in touch with him. And he also, the rodenticide poisoning was a very small portion of his pie chart. And so I thought that we should talk about that as well, because I know in rehab settings, when the raptor dies from rodenticide, it's not necessarily reported as the cause of death. It's a secondary cause of death. So for example, if you're hemorrhaging, you're not necessarily dying from it yet, and you get a cut and your blood is really thin, the bird could bleed out if they don't get medical attention. So it doesn't get written necessarily as rodenticide poisoning. So, and he also didn't have participation from a lot of rehabbers yet. So there's a ton of information out there for him to have, and I would love to help him with that. And again, none of this would be possible without banding. So I will just give banding another shout out to know if a rehabilitated raptor is successful in any fashion. It has to be banded because you have to refind it. And for a lay person, without Bay's bands, they would have no idea who she is. She's just another eagle nesting. So you would not be able to evaluate her success. So I really enjoyed his talk, and I look forward to talking to him more.
Terrific.
Am I out of time?
No, remember, there's no such thing.
You're just like, terrific, banding, bring it up 3 times.
Yeah.
Here's just a little flow chart of Bay's impact, just a kind of a sampling of everything that she's involved with these days. And so media, she's in books, she's on the news, she's in newspapers, she's in the blog, she's an inspiration. She had 4 successful fledglings so far. All the community building and community education that went on. She had a successful rehab. People got to learn about rehab and how that works. I think, like, really importantly, it gives people a sense of place. All those people who are so attached to their nests and their eagles. And, it really showed me that people are grounded to where they live and the birds around them. And And there, okay, 4 times now here, banding, really important. The education that came out of this, the research that I did and the things that I found out. For example, new data, how long will a mated partner wait? He waited 40 days. So there's a data set that did not exist until Bay gave it to me. I got to look at her diet preferences and her, her weird behaviors and her interesting diet, fundraising, pause, got about $5,000. The other thing is when you name a bird and it goes to rehab, people donate to that individual animal. And I will say that the money does not go directly to that animal. It goes into the general fund, but it ends up helping all of the animals in that rehab. Bay didn't need $5,000 worth of funding, but she helped her, fellow rehabees. So what else? Anyone want to offer anything I might have missed or?
Kersti, I wanted to ask a question or two. There are several more, but on the point of banding, many of you, well, some of you may have had personal experience with banding, and many of you probably don't know much about its origins, but we do rely upon something called the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and then the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, I believe. And that's when the banding lab, as it's called, came into being. So it's been going, as you see. And Kersti showed a nice little shot of her certificate. And if you do identify a bird that's banded and send in the information, maybe photos and so on, they will send you a nice little certificate. But those data really translate into the population's iconic individuals from this huge number of birds that all look the same. So important. If I may, I'll mention this time for those of you who might notice there are some various links that we've plopped into the chat here. And you can go up and pick them out now and open them, and they'll be there when the meeting's over. You can also go to the very top, I'm pretty sure, and you can copy the chat, and then you can have them all if you wish, because the papers that Kersti mentioned are there, and then also the questions, which we'll get into.
Okay. So there's Bay flying through the rainbow free. Here she is in front of the cityscape at Alki, right in her territory. And then the last one. So as I said, this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. Never mind my favorite picture of her. Just her and the crab are, mirroring each other. And sometimes I wonder if, how the crab is feeling in this moment is how Bay felt, during her capture. And just kind of never give up kind of photo. So again, that's from James Tilley, extremely talented photographer, spends a lot of time with Bay. And all the other birds at Alki. James is a treasure, as are all of these people. So thing I forgot to mention are all the friendships that I made during this time, and I am still like really good friends with all of these people, and I have Bay to thank for that. That is the last slide.
Excellent, excellent. Standing ovation that you can't see. I'm going to start looking at the questions and plop them into your ears, but if anyone wants to unmute and say something or ask something yourself, please feel free. And once again, there are various useful links that Kersti and I have put together. One question was, where to go? Sorry. How do you get paid, Kersti, or how are you funded with for your efforts?
This is all just, I just do it. It's not a job. I do it for the community. I do it for the animals. I don't need to get paid for that. Like I have a job. Um, it pays me because I'm a super curious person and I'm driven by data and I consume it. So if you give me data, it's as good as cash. So, and I love I just
Understood.
love to educate people, and I want everyone. It's why I started Salish Wildlife Watch. The awe and the interest, everybody deserves to have it, a piece of it, and to be inspired every day and to be curious. I want people to be curious about what's in the neighborhood, because if you don't know what's there and what they need as far as habitat and food, you can't help them. And so it's kind of a selfish way for me to, get people activated. So that's my payment.
Yes. Kersti, when your bald eagle was eating what you identified as a rat on that rocky shore, did you say you had anticipated visual evidence if there was rodenticide present?
Correct.
There had been.
Yeah. So
Could you explain that?
yes, one thing I do, and this might gross people out, is I do necropsies on rats. So people call me if there's rats in their neighborhood, dead rats. I'll go and dispose of them, but I'm curious. I'm kind of making a map of hotspots of rodenticide in West Seattle. And I give them a quick stomach content exam. So these would be Norway rats and roof rats. So it's okay to do this. They're not regulated wildlife in the state of Washington. And I look for what the stomach contents are and then determine the cause of death. So rodenticides by their categories are colored brightly, kind of like Tide Pods, so the kids don't eat it. So they're all, so the anticoagulants are usually bright turquoise, and the nerve agents are purple. Vitamin D overdose will be brown. So I can quickly tell, because the rats, they're really drawn to these poisons, and their stomach contents are usually just full of that and nothing else. Also, sadly, if a rat gets hit by a car or run over, so sometimes it's already just squeezing out of them. Just pushes right out of their rectum. So they're just blue. And sometimes you can see it through the skin of their stomach. It's just bright blue. So that's what I was looking for.
Thank you. Thank you. Pamela had asked towards the end of your talk, now that you have taught so many people, what is it that we can do? What can we do now that we know what you are showing us?
I'm not sure I understand what the do is. Do about.
Pamela, you're welcome to try to clarify that if you'd like.
Well, how do we be? What is, okay, your observation are bringing us intel. So do we go policy? Do we go to the city council? What do you want to see happen for maybe, Bay? And is there anything that the community can do besides watching in terms of pushing policy forward, increasing better habitat, what their challenges are, rat poison, whatnot? Any call to action, I guess I would say.
Yeah, so I do a ton of work on rodenticide, and if you want policy, you have to get the data. And so, you know, as a field biologist, you collect the data and you give it over, you know, to the powers that be. You have to prove that there's a problem. And rodenticide is a really tricky one. So I am co-lead with Josh Morris at Birds Connect. You know, we have our rodenticide coalition, and we've been working on this for years, and we'll get a little traction, and then it just doesn't work out. People are afraid of this topic because there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on from the pesticide industry. They're really good, they're really vocal, they have a lot of money. So data collection is a huge part of it, but you know, actually getting policy changed is a whole other thing that I don't really have the patience for that. As you know, I'm involved, you know, in the tree world and saving our tree canopy, and it's really, really hard. It's many hours and lots of abuse. Like bald eagles, they're pretty adaptable right now. They're starting to even use, you know, subpar habitat. But they need those big trees that are where they can see from. And absolutely. And it's hard when, so like for example, rodenticide, and you have the studies of, you know, the Urban Raptor Conservancy did, you know, exhaustive studies of birds that, you know, were exposed to rodenticides and how many different kinds. You know, I knew an owl. She was my friend, you know, for over 10 years, and I found her dead, and she had hemorrhaged in flight, and she had 4 different rat poisons in her. 2 years later, her daughter succumbed to the same problem. But when you look, like when you see these things, you know, it impacts you and you think, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem. Birds are dying, birds are suffering. But when you look at the overall population, say like Cooper's hawks, who I think are at carrying capacity in Seattle, yes, they're dying from rodenticide, but at the same time, they're at carrying capacity. And how do you take that to a policymaker and say, well, there's a problem, you know, but they're doing great. So it's really complicated. The integration part of it, you know, if you're not seeing it, and you know, how are you going to do something about it if you don't know what it needs, you know?
Right.
What we need, Kersti, I'm saying this in jest sort of, is a long-lived mega fauna like P22, if that's
Yeah.
cryptic. P22 was the mountain lion who for over 10 years somehow got in and out of Griffith Park and was known by, I think, a lot of people in that city. And when that cat was found almost dead and found to have heavy rodenticide poisoning, it led to the banning of rodenticide, 3rd generation rodenticides in this whole state of California.
Well, it took, I mean, there was a lot of work that was done
Led,
for that.
led
And
to.
P22 had, again, so that's the tricky part of it. He had rodenticide in him, but it was not his cause of death. So cats are a little bit more resistant to rodenticide, but and like coyotes, it weakens their immune system and does other things to them and makes them kind of get mange and infections. And like coyotes will come closer into urban areas looking for, you know, easier snacks. So it doesn't, in the beginning, outright kill them. It gives them this other host of issues that will kill them. So that, like I was referencing in Christian Hagen's, you know, quest to, you know, see how successful rehab raptors are, if it's not being reported as the cause of death, it's a secondary or a tertiary thing that happens. That's a problem, and that's where the problem that we bump up into with legislation. But P22 is a great example because he's charismatic. Yeah, they call him the Brad Pitt of mountain lions, and but we have plenty of pictures, plenty of really sad pictures, little baby owls, you know, hemorrhaging in the field, and just, you know, it's not doing it. You have to find a bold and brave policymaker that can go against the pesticide industry And it's really hard. Rodenticide is a hard issue. But it doesn't mean that we don't.
Wonderful, wonderful. Wonderful discussion. Please carry on. Yes.
One thing I'll note on that as well as a rehabber, a lot of the times it does get reported secondarily because a lot of rehab centers just don't have the funding to do those like chemistry panel tests.
Right.
So those tests can be $50, $100 or more dollars, and that's resources we could put toward definitively helping another patient versus proving for sure that this was rodenticide. So a lot of times it gets reported as a secondary thing because we can see X, Y, and Z symptoms that align with rodenticide, but there are other things that could potentially be happening. So we'll record the symptoms and then make notes that likely rodenticide, but unless we have the extra funding, won't necessarily say this was rodenticide, period.
Right. Excellent point. And then with domestic animals, I don't know if this is still the case, but the industry charges veterinarians to report poisonings. So that's prohibitive in itself. I know plenty of people who have lost a domestic animal to rodenticide.
Do you mean it charges the veterinarians money to report?
Correct.
So, what? It's crazy.
Well, there's a fee.
Okay.
There's a fee.
Is there-
Well, we will keep working on it.
Yes.
Kersti, we're really grateful that you brought all your expertise and experience and passion to this topic for us. And we'll be watching for a bald eagle with a interesting left iris.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what she does in 2026. Thank you
If there
so
are
much.
any other questions, now's a good time. Otherwise, ... Well, thank you once again, Kersti, and thank you all for coming.